New Zealand honey producers have been dealt a heavy blow in their long fight to trademark Mānuka Honey and stop Australian beekeepers using the name after IPONZ, the Intellectual Property Office of New Zealand, refused a bid to trademark the term Mānuka Honey. The decision is the result of a long-standing legal battle with Australian honeymakers who opposed the trademark proposal. They also produce a honey from a variety of Mānuka. The office said Mānuka honey is descriptive, not distinctive, and can't be monopolised by a trademark owner. Linnell Huria no Ngāti Ruanui, Ngā Ruahine, is leading expert on trademarks and copyright in New Zealand, was the first Māori patent attorney and is recognised as a leading expert on Indigenous intellectual property rights. Kahui Legal's Linnell Huria is with us now. Tēnā koe, Linnell, thanks for joining us.
Tēnā koe, thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Now, IPONZ says Aotearoa New Zealand left trademarking Mānuka too late because Australia was already selling Mānuka honey. Were we too late?
Well, I guess we're never too late to try and protect our taonga. I think there's always room to, restore or maintain the taonga status of our taonga species. And whilst this application was probably filed, in the midst of this huge insurgence or growth of the Mānuka honey industry, and so therefore, it does appear that it was a little bit too late, but it's never too late for protecting our taonga, in my view.
Well, do you believe the Māori language and culture have been misappropriated by Australian honeymakers?
Oh, it definitely has been, and we've heard some statements, certainly in the last day or two, claiming Mānuka without the macron as an Australian word now. Unfortunately, that's not true, and we maintain that Mānuka is a Māori word with or without the macron, and we will continue this battle.
The Intellectual Property Office says neither Australia or New Zealand can now trademark Mānuka honey. How does this affect the Mānuka Charitable Trust?
Obviously, it's disappointing, but the Mānuka Charitable Trust was set up to fulfil a role of maintaining the mana and mauri of our taonga, and so that role remains. They still have that role to pursue and ensure that the mana and mauri of Mānuka is maintained.
So what does this mean in the long term? Does this mean ruling out any continued fight for Indigenous rights? Is it futile to continue to fight?
I think this decision confirms what we've always known, that the intellectual property system doesn't cater to Indigenous views and Indigenous intellectual property rights. And so, again, that's been reaffirmed. It's definitely a setback in terms of the protection of our taonga and enabling us to maintain the mana and mauri of our taonga Mānuka, but it doesn't, deter us from that, that role that we have to continue to pursue and ensure that our taonga are protected. And the trust and the directors of Te Pito Limited, which is a subsidiary of the trust, we met last night and we all reaffirmed our commitment to the kaupapa.
Linnell, how indicative is this then of the limitations of conventional international property law to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples and their taonga?
It just, like I said, it just reaffirms that we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it doesn't work. We need other regimes and structures to ensure that our taonga are protected. That was what was proposed in the Y262 claim, was recommended in the Y262 report. Te Taumata Whakapumo, which has since been established, is looking to design a taonga framework. And this decision just reaffirms that this is urgently needed, and we need to set up these additional frameworks, additional regimes to ensure that our taonga are protected.
Linnell, you were one of the first, or the first, Māori patent attorney. I believe you spent more than 30 years in the sector. If you're not confident of a good outcome, what do we need to do then to ensure Māori taonga are protected?
Well, there's so much more that we can do. If we think back to the Mānuka sit through the Mānuka history of Mānuka and the research that was done back in the 80s. Māori were not involved in that research. Our mātauranga has been used to create this industry, and there's been no clear partnership with Māori until the establishment of the trust. So there's a lot of little things that we could have done along the way to ensure that our taonga was protected. And so it really is imperative or important that we, learn from the lessons from what's happened with Mānuka, and we ensure that it doesn't happen with our other taonga as we start to explore, the special properties that our Indigenous flora and fauna does have, that we acknowledge that mātauranga, we acknowledge the taonga that we have, and we protect them in the way that's consistent with a te ao Māori perspective.
So how do we prepare then? How do we better prepare to ensure that a lot of these words, you've spoken a little to this, how do we make sure that we're prepared to fight off any challenges to some of our taonga, our Māori culture and our reo?
I think it's just taking a different approach and not assuming that everything just falls into the, we call it the public domain and intellectual property law. That everything doesn't automatically fall into that space, and so it's not free for us to just all use as we would like. That these words, that our kupu has whakapapa, that our taonga has whakapapa, that we need to acknowledge that whakapapa and treat our taonga in a different way, work with them in a different way. It doesn't mean we can't use our taonga, we can't commercialise our taonga. What it does mean is that we just need to progress in a slightly different way and not be so focused on the commercialisation aspect. We need to ensure that our taonga are protected, that we use them in a sustainable manner, like it says in the Convention on Biological Diversity. Ensuring that our taonga remain not just for us, but for our future generations as well.
Yeah, nicely said. Lawyer Linnell Tawhiri-Huria, leading expert on trademarks and copyright in New Zealand. Thank you so much for your time today. Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi ni.